This is Bucharest. The long-standing capital of Romania, Bucharest is the cultural hub of the Romanian people and known for its rich art scene. But unfortunately, despite its history and importance, it's mostly made up of ugly, modernist buildings from its communist era. Even though Bucharest is relatively walkable and has a growing metro system, unlike most American cities, by European standards, the city has a quite low aesthetic profile because of its lack of classical architecture. There are a few exceptions here and there, but modernism dominates most streets and corners, with the only part of the city that offers more beauty being the very small Old Town section, which even then has its fair share of ugly, modernist buildings. Considering Bucharest's long history, this reality is pretty shocking. But was Bucharest ever a beautiful, classical city to the standard of the well-established Western European cities? Yes, it was. This was Bucharest. Bucharest was known as the Paris of the East, or Little Paris, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Similar to Russia at the time, the Romanian upper and middle classes had a strong affinity with French culture, and therefore Bucharest had adopted many of the same design principles adapted for the Eastern European setting. This affected the buildings, street layouts, and even lighting. While this often resulted in Beaux-Arts, neoclassical, and Art Nouveau style buildings, there was also the creation of the Neo-Romanian style, which had wonderfully blended local traditional styles with Parisian Belle Epoque elements. With architects such as Ion Mincu, Peter Antonescu, and Cristofi Cerchez, with this period of beauty and innovation being known as Bucharest's Golden Age. While some of these masterpieces are still standing, many have been lost, with a whopping 80% of the city's classical architecture having been destroyed. Hey guys, if you're enjoying the video, be sure to drop a like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel for more content like this. There were three main events that had caused this destruction. The first is World War II, where Bucharest was bombed heavily, as Romania was an Axis country and therefore was a target of the Allied powers. The second was the 1977 Vrancea earthquake, a 7.4 magnitude earthquake which killed over 1,500 people and destroyed much of Bucharest, including the Old Town and the surrounding historic core. But of course, it wasn't purely war and natural disasters that destroyed so much of old Bucharest, but also ideology, as under communism and Nicolae Ceausescu's rule, large swaths of Bucharest city center was destroyed in the name of Soviet planning, inspired by the Soviet systemization of Pyongyang under Kim Il-sung that had entirely wiped out any remaining classical buildings in favor of Stalinist and modernist buildings that were in line with the Soviet design philosophy. This had resulted in a quarter of Bucharest's historic core being completely demolished to make way for the Centrul Civic, a super-wide strode lined with modernist high-rises, and Palace of the Parliament, which has a postmodern neoclassical style that looks far more weird and daunting than it does beautiful. This massive project is the heaviest building in the world and is the third largest administrative building in the world. It was extremely expensive, as you can probably imagine, taking well over a decade to complete, and has been an utter disaster, with the palace still 70% vacant to this day. And this whole project was slapped right on top of the heart of Bucharest, dividing neighborhoods and streets that had been connected for decades and centuries. What kind of place could do something so horrible? Oh, right. Other neighborhoods were destroyed too, such as the Uranus district, which had many pre-Belle Epoque and vernacular buildings, such as the Biserica Uranus. There was also the razing of the Vacaresti and Dudesti areas, which churches, synagogues, and monasteries often specifically targeted. This has all come to be known as Ceausescuma, with it having destroyed more of classical Bucharest than both the earthquake and even World War II. According to Sabine Dragulin, the war and the earthquake combined destroyed only 18% of what Ceausescuma did. Truly remarkable. This is just a taste of what Bucharest had lost. Bucharest shows us that mid-20th century urban destruction and uglification was not just an American phenomenon or a result of the world wars. Romania's communist government and Nicolae Ceausescu were evil for what they did. Of course, they were catastrophic for other reasons too, but I'm just talking strictly about urbanism here, as they ripped the history, soul, and beauty from Romania's most glorious and celebrated city. But to think that American cities had undergone similar levels of destruction, or oftentimes even greater, should really put things into perspective and should deepen the American public's vitriol against urban renewal and its resulting urban highways, surface parking, and modernist monstrosities. And yet, this history is relatively unknown amongst the American public, and is just not a part of the cultural zeitgeist in the way that it should be. And even when it is brought up, oftentimes it's not exactly in the way you'd think it'd be spoken about, with the praising of our destructive highways, and the continued celebration and building of the ugly modern skyscrapers that replace beautiful and culturally significant streets. There have been a couple of new urbanist projects in Bucharest that have brought some beauty back to the city, such as the under construction National Cathedral, which looks incredible, and a few new hotels such as the Intercontinental Indigo, and historic building restorations. But this is quite limited as compared to the scope of the modernist presence in the city. At the very least, amongst the streets and neighborhoods that were lucky enough to be less affected by Bucharest's volatile mid to late 20th century, there are still a fair few beautiful, enriching buildings that have managed to survive. And the streets themselves are lush, narrow, and provide a very unique urban experience. Despite how much of Bucharest was destroyed, what remains from before shows just how special of a city it was, and in many ways, still is. and that if Bucharest ever decided to rebuild with its past beauty and building traditions in mind, it has a great foundation to work with. Which lost buildings would you like to see rebuilt? Thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time. And now a shout out to my incredible supporters on Patreon: Sven Weisbrod, Guy Courtois, Grandpa Allen, Jean Baptista, Ruben Hansen, James Whale, Michael Goldman, Ulysses Arnold, Ehsan Mirza, Joseph, Roach, Eric Martz, Simon Kendrick, Fortunate Calf, VJ Mari, Glenn Myers, and my dad.